Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I trust your last day of EAGX has been going well. Okay, so today's session is going to be on transforming Africa's food system through research, innovation, and policy. This talk explores how Africa can achieve a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable food system by leveraging the power of evidence-based research, technological innovation, and forward-thinking policy frameworks. We'll be looking at how to tackle urgent challenges like food insecurity, post-harvest loss, and climate change, while also unlocking exciting opportunities in youth engagement, agri-tech, and value chain development and cross-sector collaboration. The goal, a shift from subsistence to sustainability, building food systems that not only nourish the continent, but also drive economic growth and social equity. This will be a lightning talk. David will speak for about 10 minutes, followed by 2 minutes of Q&A, so feel free to submit your questions on Swapcard as the talk progresses. Our speaker, David Omale, who is a research assistant in food microbiology and biotechnology at the Department of Food Science and Technology, University of Nigeria. He leads the University of Nigeria ALG Protein Project, a student-led initiative advancing research, education, and innovation in sustainable protein systems with a focus on African contexts. His work centers on fermentation-based alternative proteins, the valorization of underutilized crops and food waste, and the intersection of food systems transformation, nutrition, and environmental sustainability. Under his leadership, the ALG Protein Project in Nigeria has mobilized students, hosted national summits, and built collaborative bridges across academia, advocacy, and entrepreneurship. David is deeply passionate about building Africa-led solutions to protein insecurity rooted in science, but always respectful of local cultures and values. It is my honor to introduce and welcome David Omale.
Good day, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm happy to be here. My name is David Omale. I'm a research assistant in food microbiology and biotechnology at the University of Nigeria. I lead the University of Nigeria Alternative Protein Project, and what we do is to promote and to advocate for research, education, and innovation into alternative proteins. So today I'm here to talk about transforming Africa's food system through research, innovation, and policy. Okay, so what are the food systems challenges in Africa? All right, so we know that the global population is projected to grow to 10 billion by 2050. And for that, we'll need to increase our food supply to about 60 to 70%. But prior to COVID, we had food security challenges, particularly in Nigeria. And these things are what determine how resilient our food systems are. Okay. Okay. Oh. Okay. All right. So, we all know about the two forms of agriculture we have. We have both plant and annual agriculture. And out of the available land that is habitable by man, animal agriculture takes the largest chunk out of it. But the thing is, out of the calorie and protein supply that we get, plant protein sources contribute more. Then again, we see a rising trajectory at the rate of urbanization we're experiencing in African societies today, particularly new, more advanced cities that are popping up. And one thing that comes with urbanization is food convenience. And to get food convenience, we need what? Industrialization. One other thing we look at in terms of urbanization is what? Proteins. Urbanized societies always demand what? High protein intake. Now, what is the impact of our diet on the food system? So, industrial animal agriculture drives these challenges: animal suffering, biosecurity risk, global food insecurity, and environmental devastation. Now, solutions have come up like regenerative agriculture, which have been proposed to what? Rehabilitate land and build organic matter that can become carbon sinks. But one thing is, at the rates at which we consume food today, particularly meat, we need to look for what? More sustainable means. Because the way we produce food today tends to what? Harm the environment. Now, when we swap conventional meats, which is our beef that we are familiar with, for sustainable sources like plant-based proteins, we see a close 90% reduction in land use, in greenhouse gas emissions, in water use, and in aquatic eutrophication. Now, how do we feed Africa without relying on animals? The answer is alternative proteins. Now, a bit of background: alternative proteins are non-animal sources of proteins that tend towards mimic the nutritional, the functional, and the sensory properties of animal proteins. So the taste, the texture, how we see animal proteins, like our beef, that redness, that color we find so attractive in milk. The purpose of animal proteins is to, the purpose of alternative proteins is to advance and produce these alternatives. Now, why do we feel this is tractable? First of all, urbanization. Urbanized cities are growing. Secondly, demand. We know Africans' demand for meat is increasing, and governments are working to do what? To produce, to provide proteins, animal proteins for Nigerians. But how do we do that if not through industrialization? And lastly, innovation. Now, food systems innovation is another concept in alternative proteins, and the purpose of food system innovation is to see how we can use research or science-based strategies to provide these what? Alternatives to animal proteins. So one of them is what? Fermentation. So is there anybody that is not familiar with that term here? Fermentation? Okay, so when you talk about fermentation, fermentation involves the use of microorganisms. These are tiny organisms that convert food or raw materials into well-consumable and attractive forms. So we know our local condiments like Ero and the likes. We know cheese. We know yogurts. These are products that are gotten through fermentation, and this production method, this science, can also be used to get what? Alternative protein sources. All right, so fermentation has three different methods. One is traditional fermentation, which we're all familiar with, our yogurt production and the likes. And it can be used to produce alternative protein products like tempeh. Now, tempeh is gotten from soybean, and you tend to inoculate your microorganisms, and these organisms work on soybean and to produce a well-compact form of protein cake for you. Secondly, we have biomass fermentation. Here you have microorganisms that can grow very quickly into whole cells that can turn to proteins for our consumption. And lastly, we have precision fermentation. So those in the science or biological sciences here are familiar with the term recombinant DNA technology. Is that technology that they use to produce insulin. So this technology can be applied in the production of alternative protein products. Now, mapping the ecosystem. Now, how do we work together to advance these alternative protein technologies? First of all, we need to incubate student communities. We need to incubate student groups that can do this job. As like I mentioned earlier, I'm part of a group called the Alternative Protein Project, and we advocate for research and innovation into alternative proteins. And what you are seeing here is a cluster of groups around the world similar to ours that advocate for these things in our universities. So we work with lecturers, we provide them with the resources and the tools they need to produce these products. Now, what we need in Africa is how can we get these things to work for us? Lastly, policy advocacy, to integrate this into our national nutrition policies. We also need enough data, research incentives, and regulatory support from the government. Now, what we don't know is the aspect of evidence-based research. We need R&D studies to understand how we can meet up with the nutritional needs of Nigerians using this particular alternative protein technology I mentioned. We also need market analysis and techno-economic analysis and LCA to see, okay, how these things can function in our society. Is there a market for them? And lastly, we also need to develop EA tools that can help us in monitoring and evaluating if these initiatives are impactful. Now, the call to action, we need to advocate for funding. We need incubators that can create startup environments for these ideas to thrive. I need to create a link between farmers, researchers, and lastly, entrepreneurs. So the last thing I'll say is try to join a group like ours or try to form one in your school too. So if you need more details, you can reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk, David. Can we get another round of applause for our speaker? We'll go into the Q&A. So just a reminder, if you haven't sent in your questions yet. So we have a question. How do you balance introducing novel food technologies with respect of traditional food cultures and preferences?
Okay. First of all, we need to understand what this technology is going to do to our environment. Now, we have certain cultures that are meat dependent. We have certain cultures that say, okay, eating meat or producing certain animal proteins are part of their way of life. The first thing you should do is to do what? Reach out to them. Try to bring things down. Don't become too scientific, because we tend to do that sometimes. Don't become too scientific in your statement. Try to explain to them why these things can work, why these things cannot work, why these things are obtainable, why these things are not obtainable. And like we said, the idea behind what proteins is to do what? To provide sustainable alternatives to what? Animal-based proteins. So what can you do? You try to show them the pros and the cons. You try to show them the future, what is going to do for what, not just their environment, but also their future generations too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question, what are some barriers to scaling alternative protein solutions in Africa, and how might we overcome them?
What are
some barriers to scaling alternative protein solutions?
Okay, I believe the first thing I'll say is what a lot of us know, funding. Because to scale alternative proteins, you need to carry out what? Research. Research that is what? Context specific. Research that is that is deeply rooted in African societies that can serve our own local dietary preferences. Because when you look at the research that has gone into alternative proteins, it's mostly done outside Africa, and we mostly take data and scientific publications from researchers outside Africa. But the first thing we need to do is to do what? Fund our own researchers locally to carry out their own research. We have a lot of local crops in Nigeria that are indigenous and underutilized. How can we use these crops to serve our own local dietary needs? That is the first question. So funding is a major thing. And secondly, we also need the government's interest in this. Because without policy, you can only go so far. So when you get the right policy support from the government, then everything follows through.
Well, thank you so much for your insights. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. If you do have more questions or if we missed them, feel free to book a one-on-one with David. But thank you so much.